asterisk next to it, right?
Yeah, interesting. I don't think I talked about this much, but like the people who I interviewed who moved there have like very different takes on the aftermath of the hurricane. Some of them are like, I gotta leave and get out of here, and some of them are like, well, you know, it's not gonna happen again. So
Right.
yeah, it's interesting.
What's that phrase they use? The 100-year flood or something like that.
We've had a lot of those recently.
Yeah. All right, well, we can get started with today's presentation. It's really nice to hear last week's presentation continue to be talked about. First, though, I want to introduce a new member to our community, Anjali Yates, who's the brand new administrative coordinator at the center. And so I think you have already started to get some emails from Anjali, and you will continue to hear from her about center events and see her around. So please join me in welcoming her to Virginia Tech and the center. It's what, day 4? Yeah, I think day 4. Yeah. Lots to learn about the way the university works, but it's fun. Okay, well, thanks for joining us as usual for our weekly seminar at the Center for Humanities. We've got people in the room, we've got people on Zoom. Welcome to you all. I'm Paul Quigley, director of the center. And this week, our speaker is going to be Professor Donna Fortune, who is an associate professor of practice in the School of Education. She's got expertise in literacy instruction, listening skills, universal design for learning, and culturally responsive teaching practices. Her publications include some children's picture books, but also more in line, I think, with today's presentation, a book called Mindful Listening Instruction in the Elementary Classroom. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I am a former first grade teacher, and so if I could go back now and teach my students to listen, I would, because now I know a lot more about telling them. All I did was tell them to listen, not teach them to listen. So the Virginia SOLs also, that's when it's listed in there, it talks about students will listen to, students will listen to. And so we need to kind of transition from they will listen, but we need to actually teach them to listen. So there are, we have 4 core language arts skills. They are reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And so when we talk about, and you'll see later in the presentation, we spend 16% of our time reading in a classroom. We spend 9% of our time writing. We spend the rest of the time either listening or talking. And we teach reading and writing. If you're speaking, if you have trouble speaking, you get speech and language therapy. But we don't teach listening. We don't teach the core language arts skill that we spend the most time doing. So we're going to talk about how we do that, because as educators, we expect our students to listen. We automatically expect that when we start talking, they're going to listen to us. The big challenge now is we have digital literacies. We have things coming at us from everywhere. So not only are we having trouble with getting students to listen, we're also having trouble with them having the stamina to listen because of all of the cognitive load that is going on with everything else that they're doing. Listening is learning. You'll see when I'm done. So first, let's talk about how we listen in real life. So we listen with the intent to reply, right? When someone talks to us, they tap into something that makes a connection to us, and we want to share our experiences. Like when we were just talking about Asheville. Yes, no, I've been to Asheville. Or, oh, let's go to Charleston. Yes, you should go here, you should go there, because we base our conversation on our experiences. We listen with a conversation in mind, right? We listen with the intent to reply, but we also interrupt mentally and verbally. So when you're talking, our brain is already trying to get what we want to say next, and so we interrupt what we're saying, and we're not always paying close attention to the speaker. We filter what we hear. So the things that make sense to us or that we can make connections with, we're going to pay more attention to. We can't hold much at once. We have only so much cognitive load that we can work with when we're listening to someone. So sometimes we go back to the things that matter. Our emotions shape what we're listening to. If the person that is speaking we have a negative relationship with, we're not going to listen as intently, right? If we know the person and we feel like they care about us, we're going to listen better. If we have trauma responses to whatever the topic is, it's going to change how we listen. And we often hear what we expect to hear. How many of you have written a paper and when you go back and read it, it says the same thing and then someone else reads it and they're like, well, is this what you meant? It's because we expect it to say what we wanted to say. And it's the same thing when we're hearing. When someone starts talking about something, we automatically, how many times have you tried to finish someone's sentence, right? Because you think you know what they're going to say. So we often hear what we expect to hear. But listening is not a passive skill. It's very active, and we're going to talk about that some more in a second. So when you think about where your students are in the big scheme of things, are they processing, kind of ignoring what you're saying? Are they pretending to listen? Are they selective on what they hear? Are they attentive? Are they empathetic? Our goal is to move from the passive hearing to the active listening part. So we all hear, unless we have a hearing disability, but we don't all actively listen. So this is one of the fun slides. I love this, that I do this with all of my students. So if you look at these letters, it will make two distinct words. What do you think they are? Silent. Listen. So guess what? You have to be silent to listen, right? It's one of my favorite things. It's crazy how they make up the same word with just moving around the letters. So when we are teaching a class, we expect our students to make eye contact with us. We expect them to look at us. We expect them not to be distracted by other things or have side conversations when we're instructing them. We also expect them to process what we're saying, right? We want them to pay attention and listen. We expect them to be listening well enough so that when we do ask questions, they can respond. And we also want them to be able to apply what they've heard, what we've talked about, and respond thoughtfully. We expect those things, but we don't teach them or set clear expectations for how we want them to do that. So how my goal in this started was I was a former first grade teacher. I taught first grade for 15 years. I taught reading classes for 5 years. And so when I came to tech, one of the things I wanted to do was I wanted to I love children's picture books. I've written two. They're my favorite thing in the whole wide world because they're such a great gateway to introduce topics with students. And so I started with the intention of trying to do something with children's picture books. Well, I took a class and we started studying Dewey, and I'm like, oh, Dewey, this is good. And so one of the things that kept resonating with me as I read through some of his work was how we do not create classrooms that are conducive for learners. We create classrooms that are conducive to make students. And so I was like, wow, I was creating students, not learners. But in order to transition from students to learners, we have to be able to help students understand what we're saying and how to be part of that, kind of like the constructivist approach, where you have a collaboration between, this is what we're talking about, can you restate it? Does it make sense to you? If you really can understand, you can repeat it back in your own words, right? So he kept talking about the difference between passive and active listening. And then he critiqued our traditional education system, the rows of desks that we have, and wanted them to be more of a collaboration activity where, we have a lot of that in classrooms right now. We call it flexible seating. So they have wobbly stools and balls and things like that they can sit on in the classroom. I had a teacher one time, I went to observe a student, and she's like, I can't deal with these balls anymore. I'm like, well, have you taken time to give them a chance to practice with it, to get used to it before you just give it to them? So anything that we do with our students at the early level it's like with a new toy. You need to have a moment to play with it before you can expect them to be able to learn from it, right? So Dewey believed in the importance of giving students that opportunity to experience play as well as be part of the conversation that we have in our classrooms. One of the biggest challenges for listening instruction is everybody defines it differently. So if someone asked you, how do you define listening? How would you define it? You see, I'm a teacher, I'm not a researcher so much, so I'm like, I need you to participate with me. How would you define listening? What does it mean to listen?
Absorb information and then interact with it.
Right, okay. What do you think?
Carefully considering what was said, thinking about what was said, what meanings were behind
minutes.
Okay, cool. Those are great definitions of listening. People who are in medical fields might define listening differently than people who are in educational fields, right? So it's really hard, and that's one of the biggest challenges for transitioning from telling students to listen to teaching them to listen, is we have no accurate way of assessing it. And so the education system wants an assessment. If you want to teach this, how do you assess it? Are we testing listening comprehension, following directions? How are we really assessing students' listening ability? And that's a big challenge right now. So when I started my research project, you know, we read lots and lots of stuff, and I kept coming back to this article by Funk and Funk. And so he talked about how we should teach listening through dyads. What I wanted to do with my project was, once I got done with Dewey, was still use children's picture books, but I wanted to work with classroom teachers to figure out ways or strategies that might help improve student listening in the classroom. So I didn't go in and teach the students, I went in and helped, did like a professional development with the teachers. So we met once a week, we created lessons together. I had purposefully selected children's picture books that had listening as a focus. And so we went in and we did 8 weeks of instruction. I would go 1 week, they would teach it the next week, 1 week teach it, and we would do reflections back and forth. And the big strategy that they had to use was the dyad format that Funk and Funk came up with, because it is, his premise, or their premise, was that listening is a teachable skill. You just need to be purposeful and take time to do it. So when we teach a reading class, we give students a skill, and then they go practice it. When we talk about listening, we tell you to listen, and they just expect it. So the purpose of this whole research project was, here's your listening practice or instruction, now let's practice it. So then we would do it with children's picture books. They would stop, they would do before, during, and after. They would stop and talk about the story beforehand, but they would give students purposeful questions at the beginning, and then they had to interact with a partner. The key to it was that the teachers couldn't, you know, they had to be actively involved, so they had to be listening to the conversations that were going on in order to help make sure, one, that they were on target, and two, that they were actually listening to each other. It's really hard because when someone says, you're going to practice listening, because I did it with the teachers first. You have to know what it feels like before you can start doing it. So we practiced, and they had to like sit on their hands, and they couldn't talk to each other. They had to just let one person talk for 1 minute. It's not as easy. They wanted to interject, and they did. It took us like 3 times before we got through like 30 seconds with no one interrupting. It's not easy because, as we talked about at the beginning, that's not how we communicate. That's not how we learn to talk to each other. We learn to talk by, you know, constantly interrupting each other, which is kind of like code switching, learning how to do listening in the classroom versus listening in conversation with your partners. So the dyads really focused on one speaker, one listening with accountability, and that's the key. You have to be accountable for it. It reduces the overload and increases listening accuracy, and it slows the interaction so that you can start to see if they're listening to you or if you're listening to them. So students work in pairs with rules. The speaker shares the idea, the listener concentrates solely on just understanding, and then they rotate, so they each have a practice. So it's like we would sign off 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1's were the listeners, 2 were the speakers, and then you got to switch roles. The bottom line was it improved with students when they practiced deliberately with it, so we saw lots of good results for that. The teachers would be like, the students, you know, sometimes they would do an assignment or a worksheet, and the students would come up and line up to get the teacher to look at it. And one of the teachers, she shared that she was grading one paper while she was talking to the kid, and he looked at her and he said, "You're not listening to me." And she said, "How do you know?" "You're not looking at me. You need to be looking at me, and you need to be paying attention to what I'm saying, not doing that." Another one talked about how he came to school and he said, "I was trying to talk to my dad last night while he was playing football, while he was watching football, and I told him, I said, 'You're not listening to me. You need to look at me.'" So the kids, it made a big impression on them. For the teachers, it was one of the things I wanted to do was I deliberately chose teachers who had been in the field at least 10 years, so it wasn't a new thing for them. Kind of backfired. One of the things were, I've been doing this for 10 years. Why do I need to do this differently? But the other part of it was they saw it as a classroom management tool rather than a teaching tool. Well, I can do it at the beginning of the year, and then it'll be, you can't. You don't teach reading at the beginning of the year and never revisit it again, right? It's an ongoing thing. And like we were talking about a while ago, anytime we come back from a break, we kind of start over with our kids, right? We have to start over. So it had some some good points and some bad points. The students really got a lot of it. The teachers got some out of it. They continue to borrow my listening books at the beginning of the year, but I'm like, if I buy it for you, will you use it all year long? But some of the key listening expectations that we need to think about is no interrupting, maintain attention, listening for meaning, not response, and then demonstrating that understanding. But one of the key things when we talk about, are you listening to me, is when you look at your students and if somebody's doodling, do you think they're listening? Can they be listening? So yeah, they can be listening. My daughter was the biggest doodler forever, and she could take tests without having to study, and they got mad. But it is knowing what your expectation for listening in is really important, and being able to share that with your students is also key. So your feedback for how you expect and the expectations you set for listening are really important when you are doing any kind of practice. The important part of this Funk and Funk thing is when you, if you really want your students to listen and you expect them to listen, you need to give them opportunities to practice listening with each other. It can be in a group of two, it can group in a triad. We've done it with listening circles where people would stand on the outside, people on the inside would move. But it's and I have a bunch of strategies if anyone's interested. I'm happy to share them with you. But the goal is to give them different ways and different opportunities to practice listening to each other. So this is kind of like the goal of my study was just to improve the awareness, to let them know that listening is teachable and that you can do it. Because teachers are the essential role models. If you are listening to your students, then they're going to start listening to each other. Unfortunately, we all, the classroom teachers, and I know I still find myself doing it sometimes, we mimic how we learned. So we have to change that mindset a little bit, because sometimes what we learned is not always the best. We know the good teachers we had, the bad teachers we have, but it all influences us in some way. So when you implement it, it needs to be consistent. You need to give the students ongoing practice. It needs to be part of your daily routine or your habits, because when you do that, then they start to expect it. And then you need to practice teaching them to listen versus telling them. So if you're telling them to listen to something, you need to give them an opportunity to practice it. And one of the big takeaways are we need more longitudinal studies, not just little short-term studies. We need longer studies so that people can see the long-term effects of better listening habits, but also to help us figure out how we can assess it better. Because that's a really important part to get this into the content that we need for the classrooms. So the distinguishing, I'm going to go through this one kind of quickly, but the distinguishing factor between hearing and listening is hearing is very passive. I live near a rescue squad. I hear it going all the time, but I don't pay attention to it. I'm not actively listening unless the big Great Dane that lives next door starts howling, and then I know it's like, this is a big deal. Because if it's just one rescue squad, I don't hear it anymore until he starts, and then I start listening because I'm like, how many rescue squad vehicles are going to go out to this call? It must be really bad. So we hear things all the time, we just don't pay attention to them. When we're listening, we're really active, intentional, and focused on what is going on. And so we can improve our listening, not so much our hearing, sometimes, unless we get hearing aids. So the distinction matters because Rankin and Nichols, who are the big researchers in the field of listening and education, Rankin started in 1928, Nichols started in the 50s, and so 100 years later, we're still not implementing teaching instruction, even though we have all these studies, and you'll see there's some more in a second. But we recognize that people assume they were listening because they could hear, but it's not true. We don't all listen, right? There is a gap between that, and we'll talk about that in a second. Brownell created this module called the Hurrier model, where she talks about the first step is you have to be able to hear in order to listen, okay? But then you have to take it beyond just listening and understanding, remembering, interpreting, evaluating the information, and then responding to it. So it requires you to be an active participant in the process. So some of the barriers we have to listening in the classroom are environmental, physiological, cognitive, emotional, social, cultural, instructional, internal. These are all things that impact students. When they come into the classroom every day, there's a lot going on in their brain, right? If they slept in a car last night, or if they didn't have dinner. I mean, there's things that impact their ability to listen. I had a student one time who was teaching 6th grade math, and she started her lesson with, all right, boys and girls, today we're going to use candy to teach how to use charts, and we're going to use pie charts and bar charts and histograms and all of this stuff. And what do you think the kids heard? Candy. So she turned off their listening because now they're like, wonder, oh, wait, are we going to use Twizzlers or Skittles or what kind of candy we're going to use? So there were these whole side conversations about the types of candy, and they didn't hear. And so she kind of like had to back up. So one of the things about listening instruction is your words matter. How you say things matter. It's not that what she said was wrong, it's kind of the word order that she did. So thinking about how we're going to say things. And so what kind of barriers might be in your classroom that might influence or impact students' ability to listen that day. It's really important. I have 2 students right now who've been, this whole semester, have been in and out of the hospital. One has cystic fibrosis, and so she's got some other things going on with it. Another one has some kind of stomach issues, and so their ability to listen during the classroom when they're not feeling good is really impacted, right? Because of the health factors that they have. But also we need to think about when our students are talking, are we interrupting them because we think we know what they're going to say? Are we giving them specific instruction on how to improve their listening and how we turn off the listening? And that goes back to the scenario that I just shared with you about the math class. But sometimes we turn off listen, which is what she did, because I got ahead of myself, right? Sometimes we talk too much and too long, which is what I feel like I'm doing right now. And we talk too fast. I did elementary school in Detroit, 10 years of talking really fast, and then I came down here and they're like, slow down. But when I get excited, I talk fast again, so then I stop and try to take a breath. So one of the things that the biggest challenges that teachers do is we have a lack of time, right? So when we're trying to do things, we're trying to do things quickly. Let's talk while we're giving out papers. But when we're doing that, what happens? You're still talking, and what are they doing when you give them the paper? They're listening. They're not listening to you. They're looking at the paper and reading the paper. So these are little things that we do, things that we can tweak to make it a little bit more effective. Give the directions first and then give them the paper. Give them the paper and give them like 2 minutes to read it and then give them directions. We repeat ourselves instead of teaching listening. Okay, let me tell you the directions again. We use a tone that feels dismissive or harsh. Did you not understand the first time? Why do you want me to ask again? You know, it's thinking about how we talk about things, our tone that we use. We ask rhetorical or non-genuine questions. Word choice matters. How we say things, not only with our tone, but what we say first. Because one of the things that I teach my students, we use this book called Teasing, Tattling, and Defiance. And one of the things it talks about is be brief, be specific. The more you talk, the less they listen. So be very prescriptive about what you say when you first start when you're trying to teach a new topic. We ignore cultural and neurodivergent listening styles. I had a student one time who was from Korea, and I kept thinking, why are you not looking at me? Why are you not looking at me? And so, and she wouldn't, you know, like, I'm like, just anybody shout out, whatever, you know, sometimes you'll do that instead of raise your hand. And so one time after class, she's like, I know you don't feel like I'm participating, but I am. But, you know, I did all my high school in Korea, and I'm not supposed to look at you. I'm supposed to be like, you know, paying attention to what, you know, I can look at you, but I'm not like this direct eye contact. And I can't just shout out. I have to raise my hand before I can talk to you. So understanding where they're coming from, what their background is, the importance of, you know, I've had students who were autistic, and they're not going to look at you. They can listen all day long, but you're not going to know because they may not be looking at you, and that's okay. So that goes back to figuring out what you are comfortable with, you know, and understanding who they are and what your expectations for listening are. We don't make listening purposeful. We call it busy work, right? We need to be very prescriptive on how we expect students to listen. Are they going to read it first and then we're going to talk? Or how much do we want them to listen to? A 5-year-old can listen for 5 minutes, then they need to do something. A 6-year-old, maybe 6 minutes. So when you talk about elementary, you're talking about their age is about how many minutes before they need to do something. They can't just keep listening or you're going to lose them, right? Their attention is not that. They don't have the stamina for it. And what we do a lot in like we were talking about earlier, you only have so much time in this semester, and it's like, oh man, we're almost done. Oh man, we're almost done. Like it's, I still have so much to do. We teach under stress, and the students feel it. I need to get this done. I need to get through this PowerPoint in the next 20 minutes. I need to do this so that you have all this information. So we're doing things under stress, and we don't give students time to process it and to really listen or actively engage. So I turn and talks. How many of you use turn and talks? You know what a turn and talk is? Here's the topic. The topic is we teach under stress. How much stress do you have? Turn to each other, talk for just a minute, and then we'll come back and we'll share. So what did you feel like your stress was? What did you feel like your stress was? So we give students the opportunity to actually apply and think about what they're doing. And so that's one of Kagan cooperative learning strategies. Also can share that with you. Back to this hearing and listening thing, this is just another slide to give you an idea of how you transition from hearing to listen. So it's passive and automatic, but listening becomes active and intentional, right? You can't turn off your hearing, but listening can be taught, and we turn our listening off all the time. Again, this is another chart, and it talks about, this is one that I did for my book, that came out of my book. It talks about some of the aspects that we have when we're listening, how we can transition from active listening to passive listening, from the mental engagement, our behaviors, our responses. This is just, it's a constant feedback loop that we need to be doing. We can't just assume that students understand. We need to be very sure that we're confirming that they understand the information. So this is like just a brief history. I'll go through these slides really quickly. So there is a listening gap. 80% of what we learn is through listening. 25% of our average, we only use 25% of our listening skills right now. So our ability to listen, we're about 25% of what we really do. That was from Nichols in 1957. 80% of the student's school day is spent in listening. And it's just getting more with these Chromebooks, because now they're listening on the Chromebooks, right? It's not just listening to the teacher, but now they're listening to this. And there's some good things. I was in a classroom the other day, and the teacher had a couple of students who she was talking through the lecture. She was doing the Civil War. You should have been there. It was a great lesson. And so she was talking about it, and there were two students at the back of the room listening to it because they couldn't read the text independently that she was reading through. So they could listen to that, having it read in their ears and not be distracted by the rest of the students. Oh, it has its good points, but it's also a challenge because we're expecting students to listen in different ways without giving them the practice and the skills they need in order to do that. So this is the evolution of the auditory science. Paul Rankin is our key guy. Ralph Nichols did a whole lot more. He's considered the father of listening now. Judy Brownell, who created the Hurriel model, she has the 6-stage process. And then Laura Janusik and Varner, they talked about the metacognitive strategies and conversational listening, how you go back and forth between that. And they talked about it in language 1, language 2 contexts with ELL students. I will tell you, there are two really important things about listening instruction. The best listening instruction is happening over in Europe right now, in the England area. Most of the listening instruction that is done in the United States is with ELLs, because again, we're putting the headphones on and having them listen while they look. So this is kind of like a century of listening research. Rankin started with this. It's communication time, how much time we spend in communicating. Nichols talked about listening is a formal discipline. Lundstein focused on listening just in childhood education. Barker develops the assessment tools, but they're informally assessing what you think your listening capacity is. It's not actually assessing student listening. The International Listening Association was founded. It's a huge conference. Wolven, he's kind of like of the 1980s, he's kind of like the Rankin person. He did lots and lots of research, talked about listening types, and we'll see another slide on him in a second. And then there's a listening style profile, and of course, the Hurrier model by Brownell. But Paul Rankin really talked about how we talked about 80% is in communication, speaking and listening. 45% of our waking time in 1926, before all of these TV and radio things that we have as much access to, was spent in just listening. So that's why it's increased over the time. But his data showed that listening occupies the largest proportion of how we communicate, but it's the skill that we teach the least. Our practice is very informal with it. Of course, the most basic need is we all need someone to listen to us, right? We all want someone to listen, whether we're a person, a partner, or whether we're a teacher, or even a student who comes in. Sometimes they just need 5 minutes to listen, someone to listen to them. So we only retain 25% of what we hear because we're not focusing on it. We don't know how to listen, so we hear these things, but we don't process it well enough to get it from short-term to long-term memory. And then he talked about key barriers. So this was kind of like a foundational start where every other listening researcher kind of starts with Nichols now. So he did the first large-scale empirical study. He diagnosed why he thought people listened poorly. So he identified some of the barriers that we talked about earlier. He brought listening into the world of education and business. He kind of like, this is what we need to do. And then he started helping to train the next generation. Wolven, who I think we'll talk about him in a second. All right. So we have Wendell Johnson, who was a colleague, and he also talked about how meaning is constructed by the listener and the importance of not the meaning being given by the speaker, but the listener is also part of that conversation because they have to interpret it, right? And then Charles Brownell, a different Brownell, he worked with him as well, and he did some frameworks for listening instruction in educational settings. But Sarah Lundstein focused on listening in children. So I read a lot of her work. She helped establish the importance of listening in school language arts curricula. But it's the telling, not the teaching part. So still, even in the 60s and 70s, she talked about we need to tell students to listen more, give them opportunities to, to listen. But we can't do that unless we teach them. And then Larry Barker and the ILA in the 70s, so we kind of get more in depth about how it needs to be done. It started becoming even more important in the communication fields that, they teach listening anyway, but it became like, let's look at this in a new way. Wolven came up with these 5 listening styles of how we listen in different situations. So if someone has lost a family member, we might listen through an empathetic lens. If someone is teaching us a new area of content or a new construct that we need to learn, we might be trying to do critical or comprehensive. So thinking about the different ways that we listen along with how we learn to listen, there's a lot involved in it because we listen differently. Just like we talk, we code switch differently when we talk to different people. It's the same thing with listening. We code switch with that as well. So they also did the listening style profiles, whether you're more people-oriented or action-oriented, time-oriented, content-oriented. And then, of course, Michael Purdy, who I used a lot in my Mindful Listening book, he really thought about the part of that empathetic listening, how we need to listen with our whole heart and our body, our mind. And then that's the Hurrier model again. It's a good book. It's a lot. It's a lot. And it is kind of a foundational thing. But in order to help to transition from learning to listen to listening to learn, we need to start thinking about the mechanics of listening in order to help students make meaning. So if we can get some of these things like ignoring the distractions, staying focused on the speaker, and understanding what the expectations are for being focused on the speaker is really important, then we can help students start listening to learn, because then they can start making meaning from what they hear, connect new ideas to their prior knowledge, understanding, when you're motivating students, we all know, if you're motivating students and you want them to learn about something, you need to make some kind of connection to what they like, right? And so in order to figure out how to do that, like find we call it a hook in my class. We think helping them to think critically while they're listening, analyzing the information, asking deeper questions. They can't do that unless they start to think critically, and then using that information to help build on what they know and find and want to learn more about what it is, whatever the construct is that is being taught. So why we must actively teach it? It's not an automatic skill. People do not automatically know how to listen. And the listening and learning are linked. All of the research shows that students' ability to listen can be improved with practice. We assume they know, but we don't know what good listening likes. We don't tell them what good listening looks like. It is a skill, not just a trait. Hearing is a trait. You can see, you can hear, that's a trait. Listening is a skill like reading or writing. It helps to build relationships. If you are a more active listener, with your partner or with your friends, you're going to do better. Now, I will say, I've been doing this for 10 years. I interrupt all the time. It's not an easy thing to do. I interrupt because I get excited.
It should, I think.
I get excited because if it's something I'm passionate about, like when you were talking about Charleston, oh my gosh, I stay in Mount Pleasant, but I go to downtown all the time, you know, and just park and walk. But when people are talking about things that you're excited about, you want to interrupt. That's part of how we've learned to talk. So we have to take a step back and practice how to be just a mindful listener first. It is one of the most in-demand skills in the workplace. There's a statistic that it's from like 2016, I think. One of the biggest things that big business spends money on when they hire new employees is teaching them how to listen to each other. Teaching them how to listen. Even if they've had a communication class, that's one class, and it's a standalone thing. We need to embed it in all of our classes, the opportunity to practice listening. Skills will only get better with practice. We have to set clear expectations for what we want it to look like, and that's going to vary by classroom. Students will start building on what your expectations are and start practicing in the way that you teach them, and giving them purposeful, authentic ways to practice it. So just some quick rules for effective listening. There's a 70-30 rule. If you listen 70%, you talk 30%, kind of giving yourself that range. Don't interrupt out loud or in your head. That's a hard thing. Finish listening before you start planning your response. It's really hard to do that because I'm old and I forget what I wanted to say. Listen to understand, not to reply. Focus on the meaning, not just your comeback. Reflect. So what I'm hearing is it's okay to rephrase. So what you said was you think that listening can be done in a different way, and then clarifying that. You can't fully listen, so thinking about one speaker, one brain. You cannot listen. We cannot multitask as much as we think we can. We can't. Listen for purpose, emotions, and key points. So when someone is talking to you, you can see, like, I use my hands all the time. But you're not focusing on every word. You need to try to focus on what is the meaning behind the words that they are saying. And their body language is part of that. And silence is part of listening. Pauses are important. Give you opportunity to think and be clear and clear up your ideas. It's not a personality trait. It requires ongoing purposeful practice. So I have a sentence or an equation for you, not a sentence. Good listening is talking less, interrupting less, and checking for understanding more. So it's less of this and more of that. So this is a fun thing. Occupations with the worst listening conditions. Telemarketers, they don't listen, they have a script. They don't care what you say, they're going to keep going no matter what. How many of you said, stop and listen? I said no, right? Broadcast media, have you ever seen them on the news? They're even worse now. They just interrupt each other all the time. They're interviewing someone and they'll just talk right over top of them. High control leadership roles, we won't even go there. Novice educators under heavy pressure, we talked about that. You have to get through this content. You don't have time, you've got to do it. And you know, I've seen this a lot this semester because they missed 2 weeks of school at the beginning. I have to get through this, I've got to get through this. We got to make up those 2 weeks. It's hard to make up 10 days of instruction, right? One of the reading teachers who came and talked to my students, she said, 68 hours of reading instruction I have to make up. That's a lot. How are you going to do that? That's hard. And then high stress, time compressed service roles, you get limits, right? You get overwhelmed. So listening suffers when systems reward speed, control, or talking more than understanding. But the best. Therapists and counselors, physicians and nurses, car salesmen are amazing listeners because they really want to sell you a car, right? So you notice it says high-performing car salesman because I bought a car from a guy who's not a good listener. Trial lawyers and mediators and effective leaders, coaches, and administrators, and hopefully teachers will be in there somewhere, right? But people listen best when listening produces real consequences and better outcomes for them. So if there's a purpose, if there's something that is going to be achieved at the end of it, they're going to be a better listener. If they have a goal, if they're going to help you, that's their goal as well. And that's it. Whew.
Yeah. That was really good. Thank you.
Oh.
Now I'm rethinking every conversation I ever had.
Well, it's funny because my sister says all the time, aren't you the listening person? I'm like, I know, but I'm human too.
We have time for questions. Let's start with one in the room from Mauro. Anjali, would you mind passing the microphone over to Mauro? And then I'll keep an eye on the Zoom people as well. Feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get to you soon.
Is that good, Joe? Is that good? Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Thank you, Donna.
You're welcome.
This was great. I had flashbacks of my, undergraduate developmental psychology kind of courses where a lot of what you were saying tracks with these models of, there's a part of our brain from childhood onwards that focuses on kind of executive function, right? So this is what are the cues? What are the kinds of contextual things that help us, process information?
Right.
And then there are there's this other part of your brain that allows for your theory of mind to develop, right? Like,
Right.
oh, Donna's actually trying to tell me something, and
Right.
I might want to pay attention to either her visual cues and the way that she's expressing herself, or even just a moment to pause and think like, oh, Donna or whoever is standing in front of me here actually has put in a lot of effort, and so
Yes.
they have a mind too, and I have to kind of think about that. And I think that with children, and maybe we can extrapolate that to college students, there's
Right.
that constant back and forth, right? Between what are the things that their executive function allows them to do, and what are the things that their theory of mind has either how far it has developed, or hasn't been developed,
Right.
or it's been numbed by everything, right? And the question I had was, you covered a lot of information, so
I know, it was very fast.
I
I'm
may
sorry.
have missed it. There's sort of a question here of like, where does empathy live as a feature of how we learn to listen, so that we may listen to learn? And I'm curious if where does that sort of fit in either the future of this project or your work that you've done? Because we tend to think of our kindergarten and our first grade teachers as sort of heroes and heroines, right?
Yes.
It's like they're doing the Lord's work, right?
Yes,
Like,
exactly.
so the empathy that both kids and parents have for someone in that role is probably really, really high. I don't think a lot of people have a lot of empathy for what I do. I could be
Yeah.
wrong,
Yeah.
and that's okay. I'm not expecting much empathy, but I'm just curious, like, how do we think about empathy in these kinds of contexts?
So when I did my first study, empathy was not really a part of it. But when I did the book with my colleague, that was a huge part of it. So it's, mindful listening practices. Part of it is looking at listening through through the lens of being empathetic to whoever the speaker is. Whether it's and teaching students how to be part of that. So the book is all about how to teach mindful listening using children's picture books, my favorite, in an elementary classroom. And so we have a chapter on preschool, kindergarten, and then there's first and second together, third, fourth, and fifth and sixth. And so the whole mindset of it is that modeling this empathetic stance when you are reading a book and helping students build their empathy skills. By using books that are about listening, but also books about, there's one called My Mouth is a Volcano that we use. And it's like this kid's mouth is erupting all the time. And so helping them build empathy for why that student can't wait to talk or to share their information. So it's giving them mentor text to help provide that background for them. I've done, I teach a culturally responsive class, and so one of the things that we talk about is empathetic listening and how you need to, there's a difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is, oh, I'm sorry, Paul, that you don't get to go to Charleston next week because there's a flood, 100-year flood again, right? And that goes back to our previous conversation. Or, oh, I'm sorry you don't get to go to Charleston next week. Can we find a different place? So it's giving students the idea that you can feel sorry for someone, but there's a difference between just feeling sorry for them and helping them find a way to navigate it. And so as a teacher, we're the model for that. So we can give students sympathy, but we also need to do it through the lens of empathy as well and be like more empathetic about, I know you didn't sleep you didn't sleep well last night. I'm gonna let you take a 15-minute nap in the nurse's office, and then when you come back, we'll get back to this. But being able to, part of being empathetic is not only listening, but being able to step into their shoes, right? In order to, and you say you can't step into someone's shoes, but you can if you listen, right? I'm like, tell me your experience, but you have to listen first, which requires you to be silent and shut up for 5 minutes so that they can tell you what it is they need. So it's part of what we're doing right now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Not sure if I answered your question.
Yeah,
though.
that's great.
Any questions out there on Zoom? I've been wondering about change over time, which I always do coming from the history department. And, there's a narrative out there that today attention spans and therefore listening, quality listening have decreased significantly because of technology. Yeah. Is that true? Or I noticed some of the studies are older. Was it always like this?
Was it always like this? I think there was, how do I say this nicely? There was a time when people were more afraid not to listen in a classroom than they are today. Like now there's a lot of pushback. I know you've seen the cartoon. There's a cartoon that I share with my students. It's like from the 1950s, and the mom and dad are standing here with the kid, and the teacher's behind the desk, and they're like, oh yeah, when he gets home, he's gonna get it, right? And then the other cartoon is the mom and dad and the teacher, and like, what did you do to my kid, right? So it's the mindset of the change of how we done, it does change. But I think that the listening, I did an interview last year, and one of the things they asked me was, how is it different for teachers after COVID 5 years later? How are they going to meet the gap of all these different students we have in the classroom? We've been doing that for years. We've always done that. We've always differentiated, made accommodations and modifications for students in the classroom. So I think the new challenge now that I'm seeing with a lot of the students is using technology in the classroom appropriately. But I was the Sesame Street generation, right? So I had short sound bites. We live everything by sound bites now. They're even shorter than Sesame Street was. So I do feel like our stamina for listening is a lot shorter than it was before. And so there's a book called Yardsticks, and it talks about the developmental stages of different children, like 7 to 11 or whatever, and the things that they can and can't do. And I feel like if they updated it now, listening is going to be less than it was before, because we don't have the stamina for it as much. And English classes right now are not even reading whole novels. They're just pulling excerpts because people don't have the stamina to read the whole book. So I feel like there needs to be a revamping of re-looking at it, and not just as, instead of empathy, oh, I'm sorry, you can't do that. Let's take a little more time to do it. But then you go back to the pressure of, you got to get this done. So to answer your question, like a long way around, yes, I do feel like there's some impact in listening abilities at this point.
Yeah, I don't know if the college teachers among us have additional insights, and whether you're obviously coming at this from teaching people to teach first graders.
To teach my pre-service teachers now.
Yeah. So I don't know if there are comparisons that anybody is thinking about with students in their own classrooms here at Virginia Tech.
Do you feel like your students have the same stamina they did 5, 6 years ago for learning or for listening in the classroom?
I haven't noticed a big change
Right.
personally. I mean, I have noticed, especially as more and more students have had laptops and iPads and
Right.
iPhones and whatnot, that's changed. But with the pre-COVID, I don't know. I haven't really noticed that big of a. Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. Do I hold
No,
it?
you're good. Just
Yeah, I haven't noticed a huge difference in the last 5 years, but I don't know. That could just be my experience.
Gotcha.
we have a comment in the chat on Zoom here that I can read out. How to train ourselves to listen, ? Some faculty do not listen, so it's hard to get this skill if faculty are not listening.
And that's one of the big, I mean, it's really, that's why the teacher is so key to teaching listening in the classroom, being the model. You need to show them that you are listening to them and giving them the same expectations that you want them to do. And I feel like I actually got asked a couple weeks, well, after you sent this out, and they're like, oh, will you come talk to my class about listening? I'm like, yes. But it's a challenge, because we want, once we start practicing our listening habits, we want people to start listening to us. There's one person that I work with all the time. I'm like, would you just shut up for 5 minutes and let me finish my statement, right? Just let me finish. So I do get upset even though I interrupt as well. But it's when we start being more cognizant of it, we start paying attention to other people. But I think part of it is just saying, hey, you know what? I was trying to explain to you in a nice way, very empathetically, right? What I was thinking, let me finish it, and then I'll let you respond. But it's put the sign on your door. Can you listen to me with the intent to understand before you reply? It's hard because we do. I feel like sometimes I'm a small army all by myself trying. I'm like, come on, people, let's start listening together, right?
Yeah, I do find that bit especially hard to wait until the other person has finished speaking to really process what you've heard and then
Yeah.
formulate a response.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say that if that results in long pauses in conversations, that's fine and it
But-
feels awkward.
But we're uncomfortable with it because that's not how we've learned to converse. So it's really a mindset change. We have to really, and the only way we're going to do that is if we take time to pause and practice and be silent so we can listen.
All right. Anyone want the last word on Zoom or in person? All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank
That
you.
was very interesting, very helpful for us all
Thank
as
you.
well. Thank you.
Thanks.
And just a quick note that we have next week off from the seminar, so no presentation next Monday, but then we'll be back as usual 2 weeks from today, Monday, April 6th, with a presentation from Marion Mullen in the history department. So I'll see you back then. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.